Hey there folks, you're just in time for yet another marvelous anime video. The 80s and early 90s in the anime and manga world were some of its greatest years. Out of this era, we got some of the greatest anime and manga that we still watch and remember fondly to this day. One such piece of work was Yoshiaki Kawajiri's 1993 cult classic, the ultra-violent anime film Ninja Scroll. The film follows the story of a wandering swordsman called Jubei who is roped in unwillingly into a conspiracy that involves supernatural ninjas and powerful families that threaten the very future of Japan. What makes it unique, though, is the fact that Jubei isn't really concerned about the fate of his country, as he's an unwilling participant in all of this. However, as the story goes on, he begins to realize that this mission might be more personal than he originally anticipated, as his past begins to catch up with him, leading to a journey filled with blood, gore, and erotic imagery, with a promise of redemption at the end of the road. The legacy of Ninja Scroll is undeniable, as it's one of the first adult anime films to gain widespread recognition in the West. It taught the West that animation could be dark, dangerous, and unapologetically adult. In this video, we'll be exploring 12 of the most disturbing facts that have been overlooked in Ninja Scroll, so join us as we explore an anime that didn't just raise the bar, but redefined it by cutting it in half. Let's begin. Controversial imagery. While Ninja Scroll has often been praised as a landmark anime, especially with regards to the quality of its animation and how it set the standard for mature-themed animes in the Western market, it's shrouded in controversy when it comes to the handling of its female characters, particularly the female-led Kagero. At a glance, Kagero appears as a strong and empowered individual with a hint of the supernatural around her. This is because she is quite literally a femme fatale. Anyone who has contact with her, whether it be through a kiss or sexual intercourse, is doomed to die due to the toxins running through every part of her body. This makes her come across as a formidable individual, allowing her to stand out from the crowd. However, the way she's treated in the film in reality reduces her to a sexualized object rather than an important part of the plot. Kagero has the ability to literally kill anyone with a mere kiss, but we don't ever see her using this ability. She could have easily used this technique on Tasai, but instead, the showrunners gave us a highly uncomfortable and unsettlingly eroticized scene for the same outcome. Despite being a kunoichi who's a skilled fighter, her powers are tied to her sexuality, which ultimately becomes a vehicle for her victimhood instead of her empowerment. The assault scene is supposedly meant to highlight the depravity of not just Tasai, but the devils of Kimon and the world that the story is set in, but the execution borders on obscenity and exploitation. This is also not the only time that she's subject to such a threat in the film, resulting in little room for any real character development. Her empowerment is rooted in being dangerous, mostly through sex rather than her competence or heroism. Even her death comes from the fact that she's fooled by Genma, making her look incompetent instead of giving her an ending befitting of a strong female lead. Many fans and critics have pointed out that Kagero is not used as a full character, but as a plot tool to develop Jubei's arc further. The scene came under so much fire in the United Kingdom that, despite the film's incredibly positive reception, the British Board of Film Classification cut the scene entirely for years, along with 50 seconds worth of footage. In fact, it wasn't until the early 2000s that the uncut edition was released to the public, by which time the film had already achieved cult status. This just reflects how this scene was considered a bit too much for a film that was already catering to a more mature audience. The sexualized violence perpetrated on Kagero is remembered not as a bold narrative choice, but as a relic of a bygone age where shock and spectacle, along with fan service, often replaced nuance and consent. Jubei's forced loyalty through poison. After Jubei defeats Tasai, he's poisoned by the old Tokugawa spy called Daquan, who pierces him with a toxin. The old man promises Jubei an antidote in exchange for his cooperation in killing all 8 devils of Kimon to bring an end to the scheme of the Shogun of the Dark. In this way, he coerces the protagonist and draws him into this entangled conspiracy, despite the protagonist initially having no emotional stake in it. This act by Daquan completely subverts the traditional idea of heroism, as Jubei's journey becomes one of forced commitment rather than voluntary heroism. Of course, eventually, he learns of Genma's involvement in the matter and Kagero's death, and it becomes deeply personal for him, but the shadow of the poison in his veins is what initially coerces him to set out on this mission, lingering throughout the film. The poison is symbolic, as it not only threatens his life, it also challenges his autonomy. However, when the cure for the poison is revealed to be Kagero, it transforms this tool of coercion into one that leads to intimacy and human connection, greatly enriching the narrative. The poison unwittingly acts as the catalyst that pushes Jubei towards his fateful reckoning, and he finally faces off against Genma, gaining closure in the end. It provides the platform for him to finally bury the ghosts of his past and move on to a new life where he lives to honor the memory of Kagero instead of wandering around as a vagabond burdened by guilt without any purpose. 8 Devils of Kimon, Supernatural Villainy. While we traditionally know ninjas to be these hyper-stealthy assassins, it's not unlikely for them to be associated with the supernatural. The 90s had brutal and bloody anime featuring ninjas like Ninja Resurrection and Kasaru Tengu Kabuto, which transformed these individuals from mere shadowy killers to straight-up superpowered beings. Ninja Scroll is no different in this regard, with the 8 Devils of Kimon perfectly representing this trope and perhaps even popularizing it within the mainstream. Employed by the Yamashiro clan, who intend to fund the campaigns of the Dark Shogun in order to revitalize the Toyotomi clan for them to rule Japan, these are the most villainous, superpowered, and in some ways grotesque ninjas in the entire country. Led by their immortal leader, Genma Himuro, their actual plan is to steal this gold for themselves so that their leader can raise an army of ninjas to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and establish himself as the new shogun of Japan. Each individual in this group is a visceral escalation. From an immortal to a hive-backed freak show, they present a spectacle that is as unsettling as it is unforgettable. Their introduction in the film is done in a rapid-fire fashion, with each devil's reveal ratcheting the shock and intensity, giving audiences little time to catch their breath before the next supernatural, grotesque spectacle arrives. Let's break down each of the devils briefly, starting with Tasai, the first devil that Jubei encounters. He's a hulking brute who has the ability to turn his body into literal stone and wields a massive dual-bladed polearm that he's capable of throwing as a boomerang. Bullets and blades are useless against him, making him nigh invincible. However, it is his lust that becomes his undoing as the toxins within Kagero infect him from within, rendering his stone skin useless, allowing Jubei to easily cut him down. Next is Benisato, the snake woman, who's a vile seductress whose serpentine tattoos spring to life, allowing her to summon and control numerous snakes. She's also able to escape and dodge fatal attacks by shedding her skin like a reptile. Her grotesque body horror is as visually arresting as it is illogical, which further adds to her aura. We then encounter Mushizo, a hunchback who has a literal hornet's nest embedded on his back. He's able to telepathically control these insects to devastating effect, but more than this ability, it's his shocking appearance that really pushes the boundaries of incredulity in this anime. Next up is Utsutsu Mujuro, a blind swords master who basically has superhuman hearing that allows him to react to every single move of his opponent with extreme precision. You might have heard how ninjas can blend right into the shadows, but this character takes that quite literally as he's able to merge with shadows. Additionally, he's also able to create clones of himself, fired clawed chains, and mind control people with his saliva. The next devil is called Yorimaru, the right-hand man of Genma, who, despite his effeminate looks, is able to manipulate strings capable of channeling electricity that his body produces. The final member is called Zakuro, a female ninja who can convert both living and non-living organisms into ticking time bombs. They're led by Genma, whom we've already discussed extensively. These characters and their supernatural powers transform these devils from mere characters to conceptual nightmares. Most of their powers are often bizarre and push the limits of incredulity, which is the hallmark of all supernatural things. We've already talked about the rapid-fire pace at which the characters are introduced to us. Now add to that the relentless variety of ways that death is dealt in this film. Whether it's death by explosive rats or getting strangled to death while being electrocuted, the only consistency is the sheer carnage on display. What makes them truly villainous, however, isn't their superpowers, it's their personalities, which range across various spectrums of psychosis and sadism. While there are many examples of supernatural villains in anime, the 8 Devils of Kimon certainly stand out from the pack for these reasons, making them some of the most terrifying and evil individuals to have ever been conceptualized. Snake Tattoo Seduction. In Ninja Scroll, Benisato really stands out as one of the most shocking and unforgettable adversaries, blending beauty, disturbing imagery, and supernatural terror. Benisato is a tall woman with porcelain skin who carries herself with an air of seduction and elegance. Serpentine tattoos lie etched across her milky white skin, adding another sense of mystique and danger to her, which proves to be horrifyingly literal as these snakes on her skin come to life and spring at her adversaries. This quite literally represents the predatory nature of her flesh, which goes beyond mere seduction. While these snakes serve as her offensive focal point, this isn't where her snake-like ways end. Benisato is able to shed her skin just like a serpent to dodge or distract her enemies, which is her chief defensive ability. While her skin-shedding ability and her snakes are her primary abilities, the thing that makes her the most dangerous is neither of these things. It's her seductive abilities that lure her targets into almost hypnotic trances, making them lower their guard before unleashing her dark and predatory side. She employs this tactic even with Jubei when she appears before him naked in a hot spring, attempting to draw Jubei into a trap with her alluring appearance, and she almost successfully manages to do so. There is a moment during their conflict when she emerges completely nude from a bed of snakes to launch an attack on Jubei and Kagero. In this moment, she looks less human and more like a devil, truly living up to her group's moniker. Benisato's brand of sexuality and violence, combined with horror elements, allows her to stand out among the other devils of Kimon as she perfectly showcases the film's obsession with the theme of corrupted beauty, which subverts the traditional notion of beauty being associated with goodness. Her end, however, is somewhat anticlimactic, as she's killed from afar after getting electrocuted by Yorimaru. Even her death is a spectacle as she convulses violently with electricity coursing through her veins before her arc ends unceremoniously. Bee Swarm Combat! One of the most disgusting looking villains in the entire Ninja Scroll film is Mushizo, one of the members of the Devils of Kimon. As Jubei and Kagero battle one devil after another, they finally come across a hunchback named Mushizo. Despite appearing the least athletic among the devils, Mushizo displays an insane amount of agility and skill, but his primary threat lies in the literal hornet hive embedded into his back. This is one of the most visually disturbing sights, causing widespread shock and revulsion amongst the audience. There's something about insects within one's body that just triggers a primal sense of disgust that makes one's hair stand on end. Mushizo uses these insects, which he seems to be able to control with extraordinary precision using some sort of telepathy. While the hornets initially threaten to overwhelm our heroes, Jubei turns Mushizo's own minions against the freak when he throws him into a river. In a strange twist of fate that's almost poetic, the panicked hornets that dwell within his body start attacking their own master in an effort to escape. They tear through his body, stinging him both outside and inside as he's left to drown helplessly in complete agony in a horrifying spectacle. Even if we were to remove the graphic horror that this spectacle was, the very thought of something within you, let alone that something being insects turning hostile, is deeply disturbing to even contemplate. This scene involving Mushizo's death is a masterclass in terms of how psychological and body horror can be combined and presented in an anime. This scene, like many others involving the 8 Devils of Kimon, showcases how Ninja Scroll blends action, supernatural elements, and horror in a way that's both unsettling and thrilling. Extreme graphic violence and gore. One of the first things that you associate with Ninja Scroll is the insane amount of graphic violence and gore on display. There's a fair bit of shocking disfigurement and inventive dismemberment that has now become one of the most distinguishable features of this film. One of the first opening sequences features the hulking villain Tesai, who can transform his body into stone and possesses the strength to rip apart other humans limb from limb with his bare hands. This visceral introduction immediately sets the tone for the kind of world and anime that this is. It tells us that here, brutality isn't just possible, it's expected. This is quickly followed by the introduction of Benisato and Mushizo, who further drive home these points both through their actions and the shocking ways in which they perish. Each fight with the Devils of Kimon is a graphic depiction of violence and depravity, which serves to highlight the ferocity of these confrontations and the dire consequences faced by these characters in case of failure. What's equally shocking is the fact that despite being in the same category, these individuals harbor no sentiments of camaraderie towards each other. In fact, they actively sabotage and kill each other during the course of the series, with Yukimaro killing Benisato and in turn getting killed by Zakuro. In Ninja Scroll, you'll find that none of these graphic acts are stylized or sanitized in any way. It's meant to elicit a reaction from the audience, whether it's one of outrage or shock. Not a single character in this series engages in choreographed fights, raising the stakes of every single battle that's witnessed as each one is life-threatening, with the outcome being decided often by a single mistake that leads to things like dismemberment, poisoning, or worse. The 8 Devils of Kimon, with their vile nature and deadly abilities, greatly amplify this threat, providing an insane amount of challenge for Jubei, who doesn't have any of their supernatural abilities, which keeps the audience hooked in anticipation as the film progresses. The final battle with Genma especially underscores the harsh reality of this film's world, where the injuries are lasting, death can be beyond gruesome, and survival requires more than skill, and not even the protagonist is immune to some serious harm. This approach to violence reinforces the film's mature tone and builds a narrative where danger feels real, making every confrontation count. Ninja Scroll does a stellar job of balancing its extreme graphic violence and gore as both a narrative tool and as a spectacle. Its unapologetic graphic content has sparked debates on censorship, ratings, and the representation of violence. As we already mentioned, many of these scenes feel absolutely necessary to communicate the high stakes and supernatural dangers of this world. However, some believe that these scenes are gratuitous and sometimes even overtly exploitative in nature. While some critics praise the film for its bold use of graphic violence and gore, others have condemned it, calling it mere shock tactics. Let us know your opinion regarding this in the comments down below. Is it just shock value, or does it enhance the movie? Regardless of the praise or the criticism, what remains fundamentally true is the fact that the graphic violence helped define the adult anime genre in the West, pushing the boundaries of what animation could depict. cultural differences in reception. Despite the series being received extremely well both domestically in Japan and in the West, there are some key differences in their reception. If you're familiar with the anime and manga landscape of the 80s, you probably know that ultra-violent, mature-themed animes weren't exactly a novelty in Japan. Films like Akira had already set a benchmark for these sort of films, which meant that the standards were extremely high for Japanese audiences. As you can see, critics and viewers were used to complex narrative themes and mature storytelling in Japan. On top of this, its blend of graphic violence and supernatural ninja action didn't really pop out in an already saturated market. This isn't to say that the Japanese thought it was a terrible film, they just didn't consider it to be as special as the Western audience. The film did win multiple domestic awards, including the Citizens Award at the 1993 Yubari International Fantastic Film Festival. In contrast, when the film was released in the US and Europe in the mid-90s, along with aforementioned films like Akira and Ghost in the Shell, it completely changed the Western audience's expectations from an animated film. These films, including Ninja Scroll, showed the West that animated films could tell far more gritty, violent, and mature stories. The idea of an anti-hero character who fought for his own ideals over the concept of collective good made him intriguing and fresh to the audiences across the seas. Since it pioneered a new sensibility and opened their eyes to things that they weren't sure were possible, Ninja Scroll became a cult classic, revolutionizing how anime was viewed in the Western audience's eyes. The likes of the Wachowskis, the creators of the blockbuster film The Matrix, have cited it as an influence on their work. Molten Gold Death Scene. As Ninja Scroll's plot reaches its zenith, Jubei, the film's protagonist, is finally forced to contend with the ghosts of his past when he comes face to face with his former leader and arch-nemesis Genma, the leader of the 8 Devils of Kimon. When Kagero and Jubei learn that the Yamashiro gold had already been transported to another ship after the original vessel had run aground in Shimada, they made their plans to stop the Dark Shogun and his minions' nefarious plans. Kagero informs Sakaki, the chamberlain of the Mochizuki clan, that her people served about the things that had transpired and asks him to arrive at the harbor with his army. However, when she arrives to greet him, Sakaki, shockingly, stabs Kagero and fatally wounds her, revealing himself to be Genma in disguise. The real Sakaki had been killed days ago by Genma, who had taken his place. He then proceeds to make a getaway in the ship with the gold, but is pursued by an enraged Jubei after Kagero dies in his arms, curing him with her last kiss. Aboard the ship, Genma betrays the Shogun of the Dark and murders his retainers to claim the gold for himself while revealing his own master plan. He reveals that he intends to take the gold and raise an army of ninjas to take over Japan, establishing himself as the new shogun. However, before his plans are realized, the ship catches fire due to another fight that breaks out below its deck where the gold is stored. As the conflagration grows, Genma finally comes face to face with Jubei as the two clash in earnest. Despite being killed or dismembered multiple times during the fight, Genma continues to come back to life, pushing back Jubei and severely injuring him. However, as the fight wears on, fatigue begins to take a toll on both fighters, and with one last push, Jubei manages to split his foe in two, but even this proves to be not enough to put down Genma. Even as the immortal ninja begins to reform himself, fortune finally smiles on Jubei as the room begins to be flooded by a torrent of gold that had melted due to the intense heat that had engulfed the ship. This flood of molten gold covers Genma, searing his flesh with its heat and encasing him in solid gold even as he struggles to break free. The tenacious villain latches on to Jubei as a last resort, but is finally sent to his golden, watery grave after Jubei slashes his arm, sending him plunging into the depths along with his precious gold as he gets transformed into a living golden statue. The biggest significance of this scene is the poetic justice in play, as Genma doesn't meet his end through Jubei's sword, but from the very treasure he coveted. He sinks to the bottom of the ocean along with his dreams of conquering all of Japan. The scene also highlights the creative cinematic use of settings, as this scene leverages environmental storytelling masterfully. The sight of the melting gold wasn't just dramatic, it was also extremely clever, as it highlights Jubei's presence of mind and quick thinking with how he uses the environment to his advantage despite being severely injured. By creating an immortal villain, the showrunners seemingly had written themselves into a corner, but encasing him in molten gold was a genius move to navigate this glaring plot point. The moment also represents immense payoff, not just for the audience, but for Jubei as well, who finally avenges Kagero and his fallen comrades from his past. It's a moment that sticks with the audience not just due to the huge emotional payoff, but also the unflinching visuals marked with visceral graphic sequences that still awe people to this day. Combining it with the symbolic nature of Genma's ending, it truly seals Ninja Scroll's position as one of the most iconic anime films to have come out ever. Underdeveloped side characters amidst chaos. While Ninja Scroll is lauded for its unabashed use of violence and its high-octane action sequences, the one thing that really holds it back is how it doesn't truly flesh out and develop its side characters. While this does enhance the pacing and the mystery behind these characters, what it sacrifices is any sort of deep emotional connection between them and the audience. Their deaths don't feel as impactful outside of the spectacle aspect of it. Ninja Scroll plays out as a series of confrontations, one after another, leaving the viewers craving more substance in the action. The lack of any sort of fleshed out backstories about the characters makes them caricature flavor of the weak type of villains who are there to be taken down by the hero. It's almost like a boss gauntlet in a video game where you fight one powerful enemy after another until you reach the final boss with zero emotional investment. The 8 Devils of Kimon are therefore iconic in design but narratively kinda hollow. The film excels, as we stated earlier, in crafting a high-octane experience through visual and sensory overloads. Characters like Kagero and Daquan, who hold so much promise with regards to character development that could add layers to the story, are merely used as narrative tools instead of transforming into fully realized individuals. The entire burden of carrying the emotional weight of the film falls on Jubei, limiting what could have otherwise been a more richly layered narrative ensemble. The fact that they don't choose to develop these characters further is a huge missed opportunity in transforming Ninja Scroll into something greater than just a hack-and-slash film. Director Kawajiri's signature vicious spectacle. Whether it's Demon City Shinjuku, Wicked City, or Ninja Scroll, there's a certain trend that permeates through all of Yoshiaki Kawajiri's work, particularly in the 80s and early 90s. Most of his works are stripped of complex narrative weight, instead showcasing hyper-masculinity in combination with erotic and shocking body horror violence. To put it more plainly, his films feature a lot of blood and gore mixed with sexual imagery, leaning into pulp aesthetics rather than deep storytelling. There's a distinct lack of subtlety, as it's largely overshadowed by the high-quality animations and action sequences that are presented before the audience at a fever pitch. He's a master of stunning choreography, as there's no one in the industry who does violence and conflict as well as he. However, the depiction of the female characters in his films is greatly criticized, as they are reduced more often than not to a mere sexual object for the male gaze. While fan service is a common theme in Japanese animation, Kawajiri takes it a step further, and maybe too far, by adding the element of sexual assault frequently, which makes things highly controversial. Whether it's the female lead in Wicked City getting raped by demons, or Kagero in Ninja Scroll meeting the same fate at the hands of Tasai, Kawajiri, for some reason, seems to believe that this is necessary to shock the audience and set the tone for the world that the anime is set in. This has led to critics and fans having mixed opinions about his work, with some viewing it as adolescent shock value masquerading as maturity. In contrast, others recognize it as a deliberate aesthetic choice meant to disturb and provoke. Kawajiri's signature vicious style undoubtedly pushed boundaries in the West and has provided genre-defining works one after another, but his technical mastery juxtaposed against ethical discomfort marks Kawajiri's style as both influential and polarizing in the anime world. Marvelous verdict! In retrospect, Ninja Scroll is less a film of great emotional depth and more of a cinematic jolt, an anime that demands attention through its audacity. It shocked, dazzled, and disturbed audiences in equal measure, forcing a conversation about the boundaries of animation. Love it or loathe it, Ninja Scroll remains an unignorable piece of anime history, a feverish, blood-soaked myth that helped redraw the map of global animation. That's all we got for you this time, but we hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as we loved making it for you. Be sure to check out the rest of our channel, where we post videos featuring all of your favorite anime and manga, including Ninja Scroll, daily. We thank you for sticking with us for the entirety of this video. Let us know your favorite Ninja Scroll moment in the comments down below as we come together to celebrate this iconic anime. For now, though, it's time for us to say goodbye. We hope to see you soon in the next one, but until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.